in the process of doing this work, we were able to study from a funding perspective what are challenges that local indigenous NGOs face, because they're the ones that do the work on the ground. However, they're often not included in the heart of the development of models, of prescriptive solutions that are brought into their communities. And this was a fundamental flaw, because when you take a look at how funding flows, it doesn't often match the work that is needed on the ground or how it is being done on the ground. Other entities that are actually giving them money to do this work. So a lot of funders are looking for prescribed ways of addressing issues without having the people that they quote unquote have these issues at the heart of all these consultations. For example, we have SDGs, we had MDGs that are out there. International development work is not a linear process, nor is it something that you can say this metric is going to work in Nigeria, and this metric, same metric would work in pick another country. It doesn't work that way. It's messy. But unfortunately, a lot of funders are not interested, really interested in understanding that the messiness makes for a more complicated process when you talk about how to direct resources into the solutions, and allowing the solutions to come and be generated from the community, wholly owned by the community, but that communities can also hold the funders who are either funding the same organizations because there's a laziness aspect of it, of looking for other organizations that are doing amazing work, or really choosing organizations that are created by people who don't even have any background in the subject matter. We've seen that time and time again. We've seen situations where a young person, white person, comes into a community because either they were a Peace Corps volunteer or they were interested in helping, and then they set up camp there with no experience, be it in education or health, but they start these companies and they raise a lot of money without the checks and balances of holding them accountable, without, and our governments are also responsible because they receive and are the benefits of a lot of funding that they can do a lot of pork projects, but other kinds of projects that are pocketing all this money, but in turn are not even implementing the laws that will challenge these entities coming into the countries, setting up camp, and not complying with laws. From my perspective, I think it's time for funders, for these organizations to really wake up, because as we see the movement for Black lives, the movement for reclaiming our space is here. And if organizations don't figure out their role, how to embrace the changes that need to happen, then they're going to find themselves in a situation where possibly a lot of people are going to keep calling for them to be out of their countries. They may face other kinds of policy, hard policies or taxes that will be levied against them by governments and other entities. You have to have people who live, breathe, and work from the communities, whether it's with expertise. I loved what Valerie said around, connecting expertise and language and skill set. That's really critical. But there also has to be an aspect where we can't avoid the conversation about the role of funding. Funding is what everything chases. People create organizations to chase funding. People, lie about their data because they want to preserve their funding channels. So we have to have an honest conversation from the moment you're writing a grant proposal for a project, which you're using based on a hypothetical, set of data that this is what we want to accomplish. We also have to be willing, organizations internally have to have that honest conversation of when do we notify our funder that this is not what we're seeing on the ground and this is not what we're going to get back. And oh, by the way, this may not happen within one grant cycle. So we may not have be able to meet the metrics that we've set when we were thinking through this idea, without the fear that if we don't meet these metrics that we thought we could, then we'll be penalized, that we may not receive additional funding. Because again, it goes back to this concept of, you know, the Black and brown bodies are generating money for you. And that's, if we want to skim in, you know, basic, bring it down to the basics, it's about money. A whole sector, a whole group of people are basically building and growing and implementing off the bodies of Black and brown people. So we have to be able to challenge those funding sources to say, this is not how it works. And they have to be willing to say, okay, how can we adjust for the unknowns? How can we adjust so that the goals that they set, they will actually be able to meet? Otherwise, we're just kidding ourselves. It's all about just, you know, filling out grant proposals. It's all about just giving reporting, but nothing on the ground is really working. This actually speaks to an example of an organization that I think is doing it well. It's an organization founded by a lady, Shari Davis. It's the Participatory Budgeting Project. And what they do is really focus on, well, first of all, their model is quite interesting. She's on a mission that within the next 5 years, that her organization will be completely self-funded. And so the process of weaning themselves off, you know, chasing grants or having a censorship around the work that they're doing is very fascinating. And they've been very successful so far in raising money. They're based in South Africa. And so they were really, she's been really, really, she's an Obama fellow, and she's really been challenging this new model of funding that eliminates philanthropy in so many different ways. So that's one. She also has been really instrumental in working with people. I don't want to use the word locally. So Valerie, thank you for putting that in my brain, because now right now I'm like, oh, how do I actually even say this? Not locally, like people around in the community, people from her community, on how they have a critical role in playing when it comes to their own government's budgets, as well as their own engagement in civics, their own engagement and their ability to hold other entities, other elements accountable when it comes to the work that they're doing, whether it meets the goals of the larger community at large or not. So it's an interesting model that I have seen that has been, to me, a way of challenging the system, the way Lauriane said, where it's a Black woman who created her own organization and is allowing the people in the community to demand and push for what they want to see of organizations that are coming to do work in their community. And I think that's a very fascinating model that could be replicated in so many different areas. And to be able to do it so far with the mission and the goal of identifying alternate revenue streams so that they can be self-sufficient is amazing. I think that, coupled with the ability to grow Black philanthropy or Black giving, is another aspect of that we haven't really talked about. When we were working, while I was at Act for Accountability, we had a pilot project that we created called Diaspora Rise Up. And the mission was solely to raise money from our own communities in support of unrestricted funding that would go towards organizations, NGOs in different communities to be able to meet their needs. And that we were committing that, you know, if you received funding from us, it wasn't a 1-year grant cycle, it was 2 years we were committing to you. Because we understand that the work cannot, most of the time, doesn't get done in a year. And we had success with that. We were able to fund 5 organizations with just raising money locally from the US side to be able to give unrestricted funds. And I still keep in touch with some of those organizations. And especially now during COVID, a lot of them were health leaning. We see the impact of the investments that we made in these organizations for them to be able to do the work that they're doing right now, and for them to be able to then attract additional funding, which is coming from within their communities.